you work with the best sporting teams on the planet.
The Premier League team that I'm working with now, which is one of the top Premier League team, I had a very clear remit when I came in. Understand a handful of players better that were real high assets for the club. If you just chuck a group of people together, inherently they're going to be dysfunctional. But people do that in business. I think more and more business is learning from sport that actually you need to be proactive in developing teams.
What 3 tips would you give me to get my core team around me and get the best from that group of people?
One of the best psychologists I've ever been mentored by, who was a clinical psychologist, said to me,
hi, welcome to the podcast. So today's a really, really special one. I've been looking forward to it for ages. I'm going to be sitting down with an old school friend of mine who is an amazing guy, one of the world's leading sports psychologists, working with World Cup winning teams to an iconic Premier League club. And he's going to be delving into the world of sports psychology, ultimate high performance, and helping relate that to the world of business. So really cannot wait to get stuck in. So I've been looking forward to this for, a long time. I want to say thank you for coming because I know we've talked about it, and here we are. Yeah. So, firstly, thank you. I've no idea what you're going to say. How long have we known each other?
Well, and looking back, I was at Warwick School, which would have been 1994. So there we go, 30 years. 1994,
and that's a scary thought, isn't it? So, what I usually ask people is like, tell us about you growing up. So I got to know you at 16, 17.
Yeah.
I don't really know your story before that. I know snippets, but give us just a bit of life.
Place to start. Okay, so I was brought up in the southwest, down in Dorset, and I went to the local primary school where we didn't play any cricket. And I remember at a young age watching cricket on the television and starting up a local cricket team with my friends. And that was where my passion for that game began.
How old were you?
I would have been 9 or 10 then.
Okay.
Yeah. And I played football to a decent level at that age as well. And then by the time I was 16, I was fortunate enough to be playing like England age group cricket, and went to Warwick School on a scholarship, which is where we met. And I was fortunate enough to captain you as my wicket keeper, number 4 batsman. I never felt we got your full potential, but I'm pleased to see things have gone well for you since.
I can't believe we've gone into that so early. This is about you, not me. But well, I'm not going to comment on my performance. You can elaborate.
There was some good flash in the pan there. Yeah.
So cricket was your first love in terms of sport.
Yeah.
And you started your own club. And I didn't know that. Yeah. And not to jump to assumptions, but I'm assuming you elevated through leagues and levels of local cricket.
Yeah, so I found myself in the pathway playing minor counties cricket for Dorset, and then got into the England under-15s setup, and we had I think it was the winter that I did my GCSEs, I spent touring South Africa and the West Indies, which was an amazing experience. Probably had an impact on my results, but in the long term, I think it was well worth it.
You were a brilliant cricketer and a great captain.
Thank you very much.
Certainly for me, anyway. And you were super successful. You scored an insane amount of runs, particularly pretty decent bowler.
I mean, I wouldn't go that far. So I think that was. I mean, looking back, I often think about kind of what drew me to my interest in psychology in particular. I probably didn't realise it at the time, but definitely I saw around that sort of age, 16, 17, 18, other players really kicking on, getting professional contracts, which I did, but not very successfully. And I was just really, I never felt jealous. I just felt really curious as to what it was that set the best performers apart from the ones that were like me, which were deemed to be relatively talented but didn't be particularly successful, versus those that were able to deliver, especially in the important moments of the big matches, and become integral parts of winning teams, which I think just stuck with me, that fascination, really.
So let's join the gaps between your school super successful cricketer, played for the country, got a contract at Middlesex?
No, I went up to Warwickshire, which is why I went. Part of that was Warwickshire, putting me in the school there at Warwick.
That's right, Warwickshire. Did you not play for Middlesex?
No, I didn't. No.
Shows how well we know each other.
No, I worked with them as a psychologist afterwards.
Aha. Okay, so Warwickshire County Cricket Club. What happened with that?
So I played 2 seasons of sort of second team cricket and had some good performances, usually in the less important games. But always, when it really mattered, I didn't deliver under pressure, and it certainly wasn't a lack of motivation or effort or preparation. There was definitely something, and looking back now, I've got a pretty clear idea why, but I didn't know it at the time, that would hold me back when it really mattered. And I then went on to university up at Durham.
That's when you chose to study psychology?
No, I didn't actually. At Durham, I didn't. I studied a sports science degree there. Still harboured aspirations to be a professional cricketer, but by the end of that, I'd probably realised that ship had sailed. And then later on in my mid-20s, I went back, studied psychology, pure psychology, and then specialised in sports psychology after that. Yeah.
I mean, I've got so many questions around it. So maybe tell us about the psychology. It was a degree?
So to become a chartered psychologist, which I am, you need to do a degree in psychology.
Yeah.
You then need to do a master's in a specialised area of psychology. And then you do between 2 and 3 years supervised practice, which is where you have to submit case studies and stuff like that.
What did you do your master's in? Let me guess.
So my master's was in sports psychology, yeah.
Cricket?
No, it was just a general study of, so if you do a master's in sports psychology, you kind of cover the basics of normal mainstream psychology, and then you specialise in things like, motivational theory, stuff around decision making under pressure. And then I did a dissertation actually around leadership in cricket, which I still use now. I still cite regularly now. It was my first published piece of research as well.
I'm almost embarrassed to ask some of these questions because I'm so clueless compared to you. But the dissertation you wrote, I'm guessing, 15 years ago? Something like that?
17 years ago.
Will that stand the test of time? The points that you were making, the conclusions that you drew, will they hold weight to the same degree today, and will they in 50 years' time, or do things morph and evolve?
Yeah, things definitely. I mean, part of my role as a practitioner is to stay up to date with all the latest research, so that I can apply that to the athletes and the people that I'm working with. That said, that there are age-old concepts that hold true. So if you take most modern therapeutic approaches to psychology, like cognitive behavioural therapy, for example, CBT, which the core facets of CBT wouldn't be massively dissimilar to some of the Stoic principles, which were being talked about, by Roman emperors. Right. So I'm not comparing my research to the words of Roman emperors, by the way, but I think that there are certain real sort of base psychological tenets that would hold true, but then in terms of the nuances of cutting edge psychology, that does shift over time, and it's important, I think, as a practitioner to stay on top of that. But certainly in terms of the research that I did, going back to your question about my dissertation, it was around transformational leadership, and still I would, when I'm working with leaders in business, I would be using that as the go-to around real good leadership.
So we'll come on to that and how we can apply what you do into what our listeners may do, and how they can leverage some of this amazing stuff. But let's go back to the career. So you qualified, and then what? You went off into sport, correct?
Well, there was a little bit in between, which in my early 20s, and I didn't realise it at the time. It's become important now, given that I work in Premier League football. Where I went off and wanted to learn another language. So I went and taught English in Spain. Managed to, having been the worst in languages in my whole school, managed to learn Spanish in a couple of years, basing myself in Madrid. Met my wife in the process as well. So, and then coming back now, it often reminds me of how sort of the unintended consequences to things like learning Spanish at the time was purely out of just an interest for me, but it's become central to my work now as well.
In what sense?
Oh, because a lot of the coaches and the players that I'm working with in Premier League football, that their first language is Spanish.
Right.
So certainly, it's been a real benefit for me to have that in my armoury.
Learn Spanish in Madrid. Then what?
So then I did my master's qualification. So sort of by late 20s, I was now qualified as a chartered sport and exercise psychologist. Around the same time, I was also working as a coach in cricket, and was doing some work for the England Wales Cricket Board and going into county academies, looking at what they were doing, and helping them almost learn best practice from each other. And it definitely, at that stage, I might have been slightly biased, but I felt like, the medical side was really well lined up. They had some really good stuff going on around understanding strength and conditioning, but I felt like psychology was the area still that there was massive potential for growth in. So I went into some of the counties in cricket and began working as a consultant, embedding psychology initially in academies and then with the first teams. Worked in some Olympic sports then. All of this was through my own business.
So when you take on a new contract with, let's call it a county cricket club, how do you integrate into the environment? So some people will be performing really well. Some people will be having a rough run. Is there a formula? Or?
Well, so this has evolved significantly in the sort of 20 years I've worked in high performance sport. When I first started, very much the remit of a psychologist was to come in, predominantly work one-to-one with players, athletes. I was working in individual sports, men's sports, women's sports, largely with the ones that might be struggling.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because if you look at things like the corporate world, it's usually the high performers that get to work with psychologists and coaches and stuff. So it was slightly paradoxical, but that was how I initially started. But there's been a massive shift now. So I'll work across a number of areas. So I'll work across team dynamics. So some sports that I work in, take the England cricket team, which I did a fair bit of work with through to 2019. A large focus of that was around the culture of the team. I'll do work. A lot of my time I spent with coaching staff, which is what I do in football a lot at the moment, helping them really understand how to get the best out of each individual and making sure that the staff are really aligned and understanding what it takes for each player to really get the best out of them. I'll do stuff around recruitment. So if we're looking to sign a player, in the Premier League, they're going to be investing a significant amount of money in that. Yeah. And they know all their data around the physical stuff, and they can get how far they've run in every game.
How many goals they scored, whatever.
And they've got all the stuff around. But the bit that I think has been missing is an in-depth understanding of their character and how that's going to fit if and when we sign them. And then the last bit is just actually the whole culture of an organisation that I might work with as well. So that's working with sort of senior leadership and the sort of culture they're trying to create across a team and how they role model that.
So the businessmen of sport in a way.
Exactly, right the way through. And I always, when I first started out, as you would do, it was kind of like if there was something on offer, I'd take it. But now, one of the things that I always consider before working with someone is, do they really know what they want to get out of working with sports psychology? Because if they just kind of say something like, we know we need something, we're not sure what, you're starting from a very difficult position there, because you don't really know what you're going to be accountable for.
That's fascinating. So may I ask, when it's worked really well, can you give us some examples of, like, the brief's probly the wrong word, but
it would be right. So the Premier League team that I'm working with now, which is one of the top Premier League teams, I've been there for full time for 4 years now, and I had a very clear remit when I came in that the head coach wanted someone to help him and his coaching staff understand a handful of players better that were real high assets for the club, but for various reasons there was something holding them back that they weren't quite sure on what it was. So my remit there has been very clear on working with the support staff and the coaching team about creating a more psychologically informed environment where they all understand the personality preferences, the different contexts on each day of each player and also each other in terms of staff, on how to get the best out of them. So that was a real clear brief. With England cricket, there was two real clear bits. So I remember and you won't mind me saying this, when I first started chatting to Andrew Strauss, who was the director of cricket at the time, and he said, this was in 2016, we got a World Cup in 2019, which will be at home. We're somewhere close to number one in the world. So we think the only two reasons that we won't win a home World Cup are we'll get some significant injuries, or we'll choke under the pressure of a home World Cup. So your job is to do everything you can to stop that happening. So that was, again, a real exciting brief.
I don't know how much you were able to talk about it, but obviously being a cricket fan, I remember, so we won the World Cup, and it was the most remarkable end to a cricket game I think I've ever seen.
Over,
We won on the last ball by 1 run.
Of a super over, So it was a tie, but we won on...
so all the conditions are there for the brain to go
so it was perfect.
Into any form of overdrive.
But it was actually the bit where I felt like... And it's not often I'll say this because you're such a small piece in the puzzle, but it was the bit where I feel the psychology really came to the fore was earlier on in that tournament, actually, because we'd gone into the World Cup, winning everything, and we lost a couple of games. We were really close to getting knocked out. We found ourselves in a situation, I don't know if you remember, where we had to beat India, who were a
Top
very
team.
very very strong team, and New Zealand, who at that stage had won every game in the tournament in back-to-back games just to stay in the tournament.
Right.
And that's when we were able to really tap into a lot of the frameworks and processes that we'd put in place, in those 3 years. And, I'm confident they played at least a small part in their ability to get through that and then win the semi-final convincingly. And then,
are you able to share any of those sort of frameworks broadly?
Yeah. So we, it would take, it would take a lot more than an hour to go into massive depth, but in essence, we did a big piece of research with the university in helping us understand at a really deep level, if someone was to choke under pressure, what would be the psychological process that would explain that? And there's lots of different, 6 or 7 different reasons why people would be not at their best under pressure. And then we profiled all the players individually and put very individual interventions in place that we were able to use then in the World Cup. I'll give you some examples. So one process that might explain, so certain people under pressure, they'll become more impulsive, right? So that they might take higher risk decisions that when they look back look crazy, but with a bit of anxiety were perfectly understandable. So once we know the players in the squad that might be prone to that, even if they haven't done it yet, based on their personality and based on other aspects that we measure, then we'd put an intervention in place like, having a really clear but rigid game plan. So that under pressure, they're less likely to make impulsive decisions. That's the sort of level of individual, and you're constantly working on that stuff. Other players will go the opposite. Under pressure, they'll become more risk averse. Right. So those people, we need to make sure we have a game plan in place. That will...
And which is more common?
Oh, of those two, of all the different processes, the most common ones in sport would be the one around what I would call cognitive freezing. So basically, you're not able to think straight. And you under pressure, you just begin to become completely indecisive, and you see that a lot on football pitches and cricket pitches and rugby pitches, where brilliant athletes suddenly look like they can't make a decision, and you see it in life and business as well.
And I'm assuming it's absolutely the same for everyday life. So that footballer or cricketer finds himself in a personal stressful situation, and it's the same.
Absolutely, yeah. So whatever process I believe that you're prone to holds true across life. And also, if you think what actually causes pressure, because people talk a lot about pressure, I think, without truly understanding what it means, at least my interpretation of it, we're talking about the consequences of success or failure feel really important to me. That's so it's not about, I've got lots of work on, or there's a really noisy crowd here. It's like, this feels really important now, whether I succeed or fail. And that will inevitably create a level of anxiety. And then the way that you respond to that is very individual.
And are all human beings, that's always the case? So if something's extremely important to me, I start thinking about potential outcomes, and anxiety rises.
Exactly right. And of course, an important strategy for some people would be to understand that actually the outcome might not feel as severe as you're creating in your head at that time, which can happen very often. We were discussing that this morning about how very often when you drill down with people in all sorts of contexts, they'll say, the bit that's causing the anxiety is the fear of failure. It's like, but the reality is when you, and we've all experienced that, but when I work with these people, it's not actually the fear of failure that's causing the anxiety. It's the fear of not being able to handle the consequences of failure. And people don't usually think beyond, well, if I fail, this is going to be a disaster. But actually, the reality is, if you can begin to unpick, well, if I fail, are my friends still going to like me? Yes, probably. Is life going to end? No. And the processes that are kicking off in our head feel like this is the end game now. But if you're able to actually unpick and just see, if I do fail, of course, we're going to do everything I can to prepare to not fail. But if I know that I can actually handle the consequences of failure, that's a great place to start, I think.
I mean, we are so fortunate to have been working with you, or for you kind enough to do some work with us. I saw you on the TV. I was like, that's my old mate, schoolmate. And I did the classic recruiter thing of looking you up on LinkedIn and sending you a message.
So that'll be like 3 or 4 years ago now.
Oh.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this a little bit. Like, you work with the best sporting teams on the planet, and that journey starts very young, doesn't it? Typically.
Yeah, typically, certainly in football. Yeah. In other sports, some of the more individual Olympic sports like rowing, there can be if you're just generally athletic.
So to become the world's best footballer, Premier League's best footballer, you make a conscious decision before 10.
Yeah.
That's what you want to achieve and become in life. In business, I would say that, it's quite common. We've both got teenage kids. I mean, my son doesn't know what he wants to become. Yeah. Yours is on a sporting path, I think. But it's really common for people to not know what they want to do with their career, even when they're leaving university at 21. Yeah. So is it fair to say that businesses don't necessarily... acquire is the wrong word, but the talent that they bring into their businesses, particularly at those early stages of their careers, it's a different mindset to a professional footballer.
It is, and there's an upside and a downside to that path. If I take the football as an example, one of the most significant issues that I end up working with footballers that make it actually is that their identity, because from such a young age, they've been footballers, and people at birthday parties talk to them about football, and their parents talk to them about football in the car on the way to football and back, and their whole identity is wrapped up in just being a footballer, right, which enables them to an extent to invest huge amounts of effort and time in doing that. But there's a massive risk to that as well, because the consequences of losing that are huge for them. It's almost like the analogy I've heard before. It's like having a table with one big leg. It's a big leg, but if you take it away, the whole table falls down. Whereas I would always, and I work with our academy at the club that I work at, and I would always encourage young people to have multiple aspects to their identity. And you do see this in business as well. Actually, I think when people get drawn, especially at a young age, when they find they're good at something, you can invest too much in one particular aspect of life, and that becomes your identity. And there's a high risk to that. Then,
what's the risk?
Well, the risk is that you don't have other things to fall back on. So the thing that was enjoyable and provided you with energy and pleasure now becomes the only thing I have. Right. So I can't lose it. And once you adopt that mindset of...
That trips into unhealthy.
The threat mindset, yeah.
And does that typically affect performance then as well?
Absolutely, which is why so often you'll see, as people get to the end of their careers, and you see this a lot in football and cricket, which are the two sports I've worked mostly in, that they get to a stage where their performance starts to drop off because they're like,
they can see the end.
They can see the end, and they don't know what's coming next. But then when they begin to develop other aspects of life, maybe have children, or begin to look at other career opportunities, their performance kicks on again, and you get this kind of second wind, which often happens. And it's the idea of actually, if I lose it, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be.
So they make peace with it to a degree.
Yeah, exactly right.
And is there a difference between, like, Wimbledon's on at the minute, and I was watching Djokovic on the TV last night. I mean, champion is the word you'd use to describe him. Yeah. Like, what is the difference between extremely good and all-time legend? Do you think?
I mean, from a psychological perspective, there's been some really interesting research around this. And so if we're talking about, the best versus your Djokovic's, then we are talking about a very small sample size here. But there's definitely a difference in terms of I think there's more of a need. It's not just I love playing tennis and I like, the feeling of beating people. That there's wherever that comes from, and it can.
But it has to be in the head, right? It's not physical attributes. He's not taller, stronger, or.
Once they get to that level, then they've all got the physical attributes, and some of the. I think some of the attribute, in fact, the ones that small sample size that we're talking about, they have quite extreme character traits around, like being super conscientious, like in terms of preparing to a level that others wouldn't even dream of, and probably, if I'm honest, not all of us would want to either.
I think David Beckham's on record was quoting himself. I don't know, OCD. I mean, you must see obsessive
OCD. I wouldn't categorize. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. Obsessive is an interesting one. I wouldn't categorize the majority of top performers of that, but they're very, very conscientious, most of them. And I tell you, the thing that, thinking about that question about the top performers, what really sets them apart, the ones that do it over a long period as well. You get plenty that come in and have a great season, have a few. The ones that do it over a long period of time, it's that they're able to enjoy for want of a better term, like the daily mundane stuff.
The grind. The
bit that no one sees. Yeah. And I know it sounds a bit cliche, but it's not just they do it and force themselves to do it. They enjoy it. So a lot of the lads at the club that I work at, you'll see them after training, staying out there, practicing stuff, not just because they have to, because they enjoy it. And if you look at the basics of motivation, if we feel like we're getting better at stuff, and if we feel like we're quite good at stuff, and we feel like we have a level of autonomy, most of us will find that in some aspect. But the problem is, the majority of us find ourselves in situations where we're doing things, quite rightly, because we need to pay mortgages and stuff. Maybe we're doing it because, we want to impress our friends, and then that intrinsic motivation that we know leads to real high performance gets replaced by a more extrinsic form of motivation, which is like, I'm doing this basically
needs based.
Yeah, and then if I'd rather not be doing it, but I'm doing it because I need to.
So over the course of a career, let's do it in business, I think it must be quite natural to have periods of, I'm really enjoying this, it's going really well, the wind's in my sails, and of course, markets move, politicians make decisions. There's all kinds of reasons that the job becomes harder.
Yeah, absolutely.
So are there techniques or means in which those that feel themselves feeling less motivated for a period of time that they can utilise to find that love for it again?
Yeah, there are plenty. If I was almost to distill it down into the ones that I feel are the most impactful. So the first one, and I've talked to you and your guys a lot about this, is adopting an approach, what I would term a strengths-based approach. So the default position for most of us, and there's an evolutionary reason for this, is to be acutely aware of the stuff we're not good at, and either get good at hiding that or work hard to get to almost like a base level at it, so we don't stand out as being bad at anything. Whereas I think that the people that are able to maintain motivation and actually performance over a sustained period, they're very aware of their strengths. They accept they have weaknesses and don't seek to be quite good at everything, but actually enjoy the process of getting even better at the stuff they're already good at, and take time out to deliberately put yourselves in position where you're using your strengths.
Yeah,
which takes some planning.
I think that was the biggest game changer for me when I think we all were, most of us are pretty self-aware enough to know what we can't do. I can't bowl left-handed, and you'll say I could never bowl, which is correct.
Well,
but
don't put words in my mouth.
But just feeling free enough to focus on the stuff that you enjoy and that you're pretty good at. Yeah. It's really powerful.
It's really powerful. And also, I mean, the other concept about that is giving yourself a little bit of permission sometimes to get it wrong. Knowing that you're still using your strength and 9 times out of 10 it's going to work, but perhaps just today it didn't come off. It's like, if we think of the football team that I work with, we the way that we play is, we'll play very short passing right from the goalkeeper out to the defenders. They'll never lump it long because we want to play a nice brand of football. Very occasionally.
Is that why, though, we want to play a nice brand of football, or because we want to win?
No, well, that's really important, actually. So the focus very much, and I believe a lot of the success we've had is because the focus isn't on winning. It's on playing a certain type of football whilst competing. We don't want to be getting knocked out of, finishing bottom half of the league. But whilst competing.
So it's truly just about the essence of...
Yeah, and that's much more within all of our control. If we all feel like, we want to play a certain type of football and we're going to be judged on that whilst competing, we're not going to be judged on if we win the Champions League or if we win the FA Cup or win the Premier League every year, then it's a bit like in business saying, every month we're just going to judge you on your numbers.
So winning never gets talked about?
Winning, no. Performance does. So we need to be competing. But the main thing is, things that we all feel are actually important, but most importantly that they're kind of within our control. You see it so much in sport and in business, but in sport with the young people coming through, and if they're, the goal is to win, and from a psychological perspective, you're in big trouble then. You can work out. We invest a lot of time in high performance sport, working out what it takes to win, and once you know that, everyone calms down. You can control on you can focus on which aspect I need to influence.
So you come up with a recipe, process, formula, tactics, and then you park winning.
It's still there because ultimately we all want to win and we enjoy the success of that, but it shouldn't be your daily focus. It's almost like the dream that's there, and if we do everything right, we've got a very good chance. But there's so many factors that we can't control.
I think all of our listeners are going to be really super interested in this because, you don't have to love sport to really respect the world's best teams. You can deduce how much effort and passion and attention goes into getting that team to that place. But what can high performance sport learn from business? Because I don't think that discussion's had very often.
Well, I'm lucky enough to work in both, and I think that there's big opportunities both ways. And in fact, interestingly, you talk a lot of you mentioned there about the teams in sports, and it is true that one of the things that I think, before I answer that question, that I think business can learn more from sport is that one of my, I suppose, core beliefs around teams is if you just chuck a group of people together, inherently they're going to be dysfunctional. Because you're going to have multiple people with different backgrounds, different agendas, different personalities, and to expect them to just come together and function as a team is it's unrealistic. But people do that in business, whereas in sport there is, because we know the clear and obvious performance gains. Forget whether it's more fun or not. The performance gains of functioning as a team. We invest time in developing teams. So I think more and more business is learning from sport that actually you need to be proactive in developing teams. But the bit that I think that sport can learn from business is sport does the team, what I would call the team dynamics bit, quite well.
Yeah.
So understanding how you get the best out of each other, understanding how you have those really good, challenging conversations and focus on each other's strengths, on how to develop and all that kind of stuff. But what I've brought, I've and other people have brought from business into sport is what I would call more the team mechanics in the middle, which is real clarity around the purpose of why that team exists, like accountability around goals, which often goes missing a bit in sport, and having clear strategy, and then the principles of how that team works. Yeah. So if you can't clearly answer the question, if this team didn't exist, what would be missing? Then I don't think you know the purpose of the team.
And I don't know whether it's our age, or the world seems to be moving at an increasingly fast pace. It's getting smaller. Technology is sort of evolving at a rapid pace. If you look forwards, whether it's sports psychology or business psychology, what are the things that you think the shareholders, the boards, what are the things they need to be thinking about in the future that perhaps isn't being discussed today around psychology?
Around psychology, well, there's a couple. I think the first one probably is being discussed, but not enough. is one thing we can be sure of is there are so many. I mean, if there's one thing that the last 10 years has taught us is there are lots of things around the corner that none of us have even thought of. So I think the ability to investing in people's ability to adapt to what's in front of them, know their strengths, but having the flexibility to adapt is going to be the number one thing. That there are multiple high performers out there that deliver when the world aligns to them.
So you use the word adapt, not resilience. Resilience is a phrase we hear.
Yeah, I would distinguish between the two. I mean, there'll be overlap, but I think the ability to flex and adapt to whatever challenge or opportunity becomes on the horizon will be number one. And sorry, just before I talk about the resilience one, that I think just purely from a psych perspective, there's some fascinating psychophysiological stuff coming through now around understanding, like being able to sort of measure people's brain waves and heart rate variability, and linking that to thoughts and emotions is going to become really important. I'd love to do that with you at some stage, Gil. We'll put a screen up and everyone can see what you're thinking.
My palms have already begun sweating. So the technology that's coming will enable, will accelerate the, well, what will it do for you?
I think it'll do a couple of things. It'll enable us to profile people more easily and more accurately and help them. But then the second thing, it could involve interventions to help people as well. So if I can control my thoughts and feelings and be able to actually have evidence for that helps me with the intervention.
So do you think we'll in 10 or 15 years' time we'll jump out of bed, plug ourselves into, I'm being serious, plug ourselves into a machine? What mood am I in today?
I hope not, but I do think that
I know I'm being stupid, but
it'll become a more important part. I think part of the psychologist toolkit, most definitely the psychophys stuff.
Which businesses do you think do psychology? Have you come across them that invest the same attention as the sports world?
It's a good question. If I'm honest, it's not the first time I've been asked that, and I haven't, no. So when I've gone into businesses up to now, you're given, projects that, and there's a lot of emphasis on mental health and well-being in the business world, which is very important. But I think in terms of the investment around performance psychology, I still see it more prevalent in the sports world. But what is interesting, and I think perhaps important, is I wouldn't try and differentiate between performance psychology and mental health and well-being. Like if you almost look at the definition of well-being, which is the ability to cope with everyday stressors in your context, if you're able to do that, then I believe that's part of thriving and part of being able to deliver from a performance angle as well.
What tips, if any? I'm very aware that I'm not, but if I was a FTSE something CEO, new into an organisation, and I was sitting here with you now, what 3 tips would you give me to achieve my outcome? I don't know. Get my core team around me, and get the best from that group of people.
So, I mean, that's a big question, and there's multiple ways we could look at that. I think the first thing I would say, and you're going to say, well, that's just really obvious and really basic, but like one of the best psychologists I've ever been mentored by, who was a clinical psychologist, said to me, before you do anything around working with people around, their ability to handle pressure, their thoughts and feelings, trying to draw out maintenance cycles, all the classic stuff you do with psychology is just find out, are they doing the basics? So number one, are they getting regular sleep?
Right.
So that gets massively overlooked. So the 3 main things: are they getting regular sleep? Are they eating pretty healthily generally? And are they getting some exercise? Because if you do those 3 things, a lot of the dysfunctional stuff around psychology just looks after itself, especially around low mood. So I would start with that. Are you looking after yourself just from an everyday basics: sleep, nutrition, exercise? This is me asking hypothetically, I'm not asking you. But then the second bit around, okay, so how do I?
I was just thinking about last night. I shared a hotel room with a hotel bed with my 15-year-old. So it was a bit patchy.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you can have the odd night like that, but if that's becoming a regular,
Which is why I'm asking rubbish questions, and you're brilliant at.
no. But you do. I mean, it gets massively in business. That's the bit that gets massively underestimated. In sport, like when you've played a football game. You just look at your big rocks, which are those sleep number one before anything else, nutrition, and then obviously, for someone that's not in sport, it'd be the exercise as well. So that
Hugely important.
Before you do anything else, they're your basics. In terms of your second part of the question, which was around how would you engender a team that's high, that's functioning at its best, then clearly, as I said, you need to be clear on what the purpose of the team is and the principles of how they work. But I think that the model that I always go back to is, to what extent are you at the same time challenging and supporting the people in your team? Because every team is different, every team's makeup is different, but one thing we know is that if people just feel challenged and not supported, then it makes them less resilient and they burn out. If they just feel supported and not challenged, it makes them less resilient and things would just become cozy and nice. Whereas people and teams that feel simultaneously challenged, so they're held accountable but also supported, treated as individuals and cared about, then they become more resilient, which is why it's really interesting. People talk about individuals being resilient, whereas I would argue that the environment is probably the most important thing about
to create resilience.
To create resilience in people. Yeah, there are some personality traits that would contribute as well, but the environment's super important, and that combination of challenge and support would be my go-to every time.
I think I need to start wrapping it up. I don't want to. I've been begging you to do this for a while, and I just find it fascinating. I mean, you were never this smart at school.
I hit it well.
What I would say is it's been really, really fascinating. I've got a couple of questions. I think we always wrap up on quick fire questions. I think I'm hiding them under my seat. Can I grab?
Go for it. Yeah.
Right. Here we go. And Laura, who's amazing, is sitting behind the cameras. She comes up with these, so I get to read them on the fly. This is good. Football or cricket?
Cricket.
Book, movie, or TV show?
Book. Yeah, I think if I look back over, if I think about the advice I give to my 16-year-old, it would be read lots.
Does he?
Yeah. No, he doesn't, no. But he's at the age where he doesn't listen to his dad.
Sorry. I now get this one. It took me a little while. Extra hot or lemon and herb?
Oh, it's now lemon and herb. Yeah, I'm ashamed to say.
Really? But it was extra hot?
It would have been extra hot a few years ago.
So what's changed?
Well, I think having a more Mediterranean diet, having a Spanish wife has sort of mellowed my need for
spice.
The spice, yeah.
We could do another episode on that. Bowie or the Beatles, David?
That would be the Beatles. Yeah. I remember listening to the LPs growing up.
Do you want to name your favourite album?
Sgt. Pepper's, obviously.
Really?
Yeah.
I like the cover. Yeah. If you could own any... We obviously, I'm a sort of property guy, and we generally talk to property people. So this, I'm really interested in your answer to this, because you might never have asked yourself the question. And it is this. If you could own any property or building in the world, what would it be and what would you do with it?
So I think it would be some sort of eco-lodge type thing in Costa Rica. Now, I'll tell you why that is. And I would say that I did know you were going to ask. This was the one I knew you were going to ask, so I wanted to put some thought into this. And there's a few reasons. First of all, we moved over to Manchester from Spain 4 years ago. And as I've alluded to a couple of times, my wife's Spanish. I think she had more than enough of the climate in Manchester, so it has to be somewhere tropical. And we travelled in Costa Rica, and you know that stuff's quite important to me. The sort of the whole ecology. So an eco lodge in Costa Rica, which there's some amazing.
So are you going entirely off grid?
Yeah, I think once we finish the sports psychology stuff, maybe There'll be a fair bit of time left, but yeah, you won't see me again.
I didn't see you for 20 years, and now you're. I'll track you down. I'll track you down in the jungle, and we'll go fishing.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, David. On a personal front, thank you for swinging by, doing this. It's been great to reconnect with you. On a professional front, on behalf of all my team, I thank you for what you've done, and
it's been great doing it.
I really look forward to working with you over the years to come before you pull the ripcord and head to Costa Rica and playing into client opportunities whereby you can do your thing and drive amazing outcomes. So thank you.
Thank you very much.